to get to talk about the choir before they came out, but now I got to change everything. We're going to continue with the greatest sermon ever. Not mine. But we're going to be talking about the Sermon on the Mount. And this is the thing that blows my mind. I can't imagine what it was like to sit there on that hilltop and listen to him give this sermon in full. Because we have to, rightly so, I think, we have to break it down into little sections to even try to wrap our head around it. And we still, honestly, can't fully wrap our head around and grasp everything that he was trying to teach us in that one message. I mean, because there's been thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of sermons preached on every little segment of this thing, and we still don't get it. We still mess it all up. And so I can't even imagine them. I can sympathize with the fact that they were sitting there and like, that was great, awesome, pass the plate. I don't get it. And so we're gonna look at, there are 6 times that Jesus is going to correct the Pharisees. And so we're going to go and we're going to move on from where we left off last time. And what Jesus is teaching us is, he's like, let me show you what the law really means. What is the heart of the law? He's covered some of it. He's covered, went through the Beatitudes. He's basically leading us along a pathway of how to become saved. You have to mourn in your spirit. You have to understand in your spirit that, listen, I can't do it. I need to be saved. And that leads to the next step and the next step and the next step. And then after the Beatitudes, he says, okay, once you're saved, now what? And so he starts talking about, okay, now that you're saved, you are the salt. And you are the light. And what does that look like? What does that mean? And then he goes on from there, and he talks about some other stuff, and he gets into, lust and adultery and divorce and all these kinds of things. And basically all he's saying is, listen, it's a relationship. My wife corrected me last week. She said, you gave everything, talking about lust and adultery and divorce, you gave it from the guy's perspective. I'm like, well, I'm a guy. Of course I did. I can't even think like y'all think. But we had a good conversation, and she was right. Yes, dear. That's how. Listen, you don't get to be married more than 30 years without learning that phrase. But she was right. I didn't focus enough probably on the relationship aspect of it, because all Jesus is saying is your relationship with each other, with your spouses, is the same as God's relationship with us. I cannot have a good relationship with my wife if I ignore her. How's that going to turn out for me? If I don't talk to her, if I don't spend time with her, if I don't sacrifice for her. There's sometimes that I do stuff I have to sacrifice because I'm a good husband. I have to sometimes sacrifice what I actually want to do for what she wants to do. Right? And there's a lot of times where she sacrifices for me. We're not going to talk about that. Your relationship with your spouse is to be the same as your relationship with your God. And your relationship with your spouse probably reflects heavily on your relationship with your God. And Jesus is going to pick up where he left off. This is one sermon. This is going, he makes a point and he moves into the next point. And so the very next thing he says is this. In Matthew 5, verse 33, he says, again, he's just finished talking about that relationship, and he says, again, you have heard it said to the people long ago. In other words, here's what y'all taught. Do not break your oath, which is what the law says in the Old Testament. But fulfill to the Lord the vows that you have made. So he's talking about vows. And then verse 34, he says, but I tell you, you understand whenever I say that this is a sermon? It's not just a sermon. When Jesus says, but I tell you, this is now doctrine. This is now gospel. Okay? But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all. Excuse me. Either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black, Miss Clairol. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Because anything beyond this comes from the evil one. He moves right into this. And so what is he talking about? He's talking about perspective. He is talking about perspective. He is going to talk, he's going to start out in this section, he's going to talk, I want to just kind of give you like the footnotes. He's going to start out talking about how I am to treat you, my relationship with you, how I should act towards you. But then he's going to turn it around and he's going to do the opposite. And he's going to say, and this is how you are to act when somebody is, say, ugly to you. Because it's all about the relationship. It's perspective. I'm going to tell you about the worst phone call I ever got in my life. It was literally 20 years ago. My oldest daughter, this is how old I am. So I know it was 20 years ago because my youngest daughter is 20, and when she was born, my oldest daughter went to college the same year. They didn't even, my youngest daughter for years didn't even know that she was her sister, really, because she never lived with her. So that's how old I am. So 20 years ago, my oldest daughter went off to college. And she was so excited. She went to Florida State, and she had worked really hard through high school and made good grades and was like the top of her class and all this kind of stuff. She got a great scholarship. And she worked hard, and she got into the best dorm at Florida State. No joke. She had to not just apply, she had to compete for it. You had to do interviews, and you had to write essays and all this kind of crazy stuff. But she got in, and so she had this scholarship, and so she had, she got into the best dorm, and everything was going good. But she did kind of like a lot of college kids do. I get it. You go off to college, and you're making new friends, and you're having new adventures, and you're living your best life ever. And so we just honestly, we didn't hear from her that often. If we got a phone call from her, it was typically, she needs some money. Except for this one day, I get a phone call toward the end of her semester, her first semester, and I answer the phone, assuming she's going to ask for money, and she says, listen, there's a couple things I need to let you know about before you start getting letters in the mail. I'm like, oh, that can't be good. And she said, listen, some stuff happened at the dorm. The police got involved. There was some drugs, some alcohol. I've been kicked out. She's like, but I met this guy, and so I've got a place to live. I'm going to live with him. I've been living with him for a little while, and I think I'm pregnant. And then she says, listen, everything I just told you I made up. But I did make an F this semester in one of my classes. And I'm like, praise Jesus. Perspective. And in case my daughter, because she don't know I'm telling this, in case my daughter is watching this, I made that up. So Nana, don't be calling Brittany when church gets out. It's called a parable. She didn't really do that, as far as I know. She didn't really, those things didn't happen to the best of my knowledge. I made this up, but I could have told this story about somebody else, but I wanted to watch my mom kind of have palpitations for a second. It's just fun for me. The point is, it's perspective, right? If she had started out in my fictional story, if the person had started out by going, hey, listen, Dad, I made an F, right? I'm going to lose my mind. Are you kidding me? But now, it's an F. Take the class again. Right? It's perspective. It's perspective. That's what I think Jesus is doing in this section right here. I think he's going to say, listen, we are so in tune to how does it affect me that we lose perspective about how am I doing the same thing and how does it affect my relationship with God. So let's get into it. Again, you have heard it said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill your vows made to the Lord. Jesus is emphasizing being honest and truthful and not having the character of someone who lies, or even just as bad, who uses their words to try to manipulate somebody else to get what they want. You know, some people have taken this verse here where it talks about do not take oaths, and they have taken it out of context, and they said, okay, you're not supposed to do an oath or take an oath even in a court of law. And so a lot of people will be like, no, I won't swear to an oath. I won't swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's not what Jesus is saying. You have to understand the context of it. It's not an absolute prohibition against oaths. In Hebrews 6:13 and then also in Luke 1:73, they both talk about how God swore on an oath to Abraham. In Matthew chapter 26, it describes Jesus giving a testimony after the high priest put him under oath. Paul, on a bunch of occasions, made oaths about various things. Here's what Barclay said about all this. The truly good man will never need to take an oath. The truth of his sayings and the reality of his promises need no such guarantee. But the fact that oaths are still sometimes necessary is the proof that men are not good men and that this is not a good world. I think what Jesus is really getting at here is manipulation. Don't try to manipulate anybody. Don't be one of these people that's trying to constantly manipulate to get your way. He's saying don't be that kind of person. Be upfront. Be honest. See, the Pharisees were notorious about breaking their oaths. They used the letter of the law, kind of like lawyers. They used the letter of the law, because that's what they were. They were lawyers. They used the letter of the law to try to find loopholes. See, we always think of and we always talk about the Pharisees being, well, they were trying to be like the best church people ever. They were, but they were also lawyers. Okay? They were also trying to find the loopholes in the laws. According to everything that I've been reading, what they were doing was they would swear an oath, basically at the drop of a hat, for the smallest things. Any little thing that came up, they would swear an oath because they felt like that gave what they're saying more weight. You know the kind of people I'm talking about, right? There's people that they can't say anything without saying, wow, I swear on a stack of Bibles. On my mother's grave. Right? And when somebody says to you, I swear on a stack of Bibles, or I swear on my mother's grave, and if it's the kind of person that says that a lot, what do you automatically assume about them? Lying. You assume they're not telling the truth. You assume they're trying to manipulate. That's what Jesus is getting at. In the Mishnah, which is the Pharisees' additional rules they added to the Bible. In the Mishnah, it provided all kinds of ways for a person to violate an oath that they took. The oaths became open to interpretation. It could be canceled for pretty much any reason, including the fact that you just had a mental reservation at the time. Just like we talked about with the divorce. They had, a man could divorce a wife for almost any reason. Even, hey, she burnt my toast. And the same thing was true with their oaths. An oath could be violated for pretty much any reason. Even if you just I had a mental reservation at the moment. Jesus is saying, don't be that kind of person. Don't swear by heaven or by earth or by Jerusalem or even by your life, because it's empty, since the person taking the oath has no control over any of these things. They were swearing by, like, I swear by the temple in Jerusalem. You don't have no control over the temple. Because an oath is supposed to be such a binding contract that whatever you swore by is going to be taken away from you if you fail to keep your vow or your oath. If you said, I swear by my life, guess what happens to you if you break that vow? You're dead. So if I say, I swear on my mama's grave, you got to dig mama up. You're not going to do that. I swear on a stack of Bibles. What are you going to do? Throw them in the garbage? Really? I swear by it. Jesus is like, don't be like that, because you got no control over these things. Just in your heart, with your relationship, in your dealings with each other, be in such a right relationship with God in your heart that there is no need for you to take an oath. Because everybody knows that when you say yes, it means yes. And when you say no, it means no. I don't have to manipulate you if I have that kind of a heart with God. You see, my relationship with God affects my relationship with you. I don't have to manipulate you if my heart is right with God. You see what he's getting at? He's talking about the righteousness of the law. It teaches that a person should develop a reputation for honesty. That happens when your heart is right. He goes on in verse 38. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other cheek also. We do not like, as guys, that verse. The words eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, it actually comes from several different verses in the Old Testament. They're called the laws of retaliation, or the law of retaliation. And the law was given to protect somebody who was innocent and to make sure that the retaliation didn't outweigh the offense. In other words, what was going on back then, it was almost like the Wild Wild West. If you insulted me, it wasn't tit for tat. It wasn't eye for an eye. It was like, oh no, I'm going to one up you. You insult me, I'm going to burn your house down. And there was no fairness or justice in it. And that's what the Pharisees were teaching. Like, listen, it's okay. It is allowed for you to, by the law, you are to love your neighbor. That's what the law says. Love your neighbor. You are required to do that by the law of God given to Moses in the Old Testament. So then they had to say, okay, well, who is my neighbor? Well, they decided their neighbor is only the Jews. So if you're a Jew, they have to love you. But they also added to that in the Mishnah that it also means if you're not a Jew, we have to hate you. You see how they kind of mess everything up? Jesus says, you have heard it said long ago. And they're saying, listen, you have an obligation to hate anybody that is not like you. Jesus is like, that's not right. That is not what God said. I worked with two guys who were constantly messing with each other. And all of y'all have probably done practical jokes on each other. And you know how practical jokes go. You don't just get even. There's no such thing as getting even with somebody, is there? You're going to get one up on. So these two, I'm going to refer back to a previous sermon. These two morons, one of them started out just messing with the other one. And they were kind of friends, but one of them just thought it'd be funny. He messed with one of them, and the guy smoked, so he would hide his cigarettes like right before break time. I mean, they'd be there all morning long, and right before break time, he came find them. And then they would show back up as soon as break was over. Well, he finally figured out it was him doing it. So what is he going to do? He's going to one-up him. So right before the guy goes home, he takes one of his tools, which is a big no-no when you work on airplanes. You don't have missing tools. Because now you're down an airplane, you have to search an airplane. And right before he left, he took one of his tools and he hit it. And so that guy did not get to go home because he had to search for this tool. So the next day, to one-up him, when that other guy got ready to go home, he couldn't find his car keys. He spent 2.5 hours looking for his car keys so he could go home. He didn't find them that day. He had to call his wife to come in and pick him up from Pensacola to Milton. He didn't get his car keys back until the next day when the two of them was about to go to blows on the floor. Now, here, I am in the middle of all this because I am the shop steward for the union. So I'm trying to keep these guys from killing each other. The boss is wanting to fire both of them, and I'm trying to intervene. And so I get them both in the room, and I'm just, the Marine and me's coming out, and I'm like, rah, 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 rah. Y'all are both dumb. Stop it. Just stop it. You never win by trying to get even with somebody. Tit for tat. It doesn't work. That's what's going on in the Middle East right now. The reason that the Jews and the Arabs can't stand each other goes way back to Abraham. God told Abraham, I'm going to make you the father of a nation. And he's like, cool, and 20 years goes by and nothing. And so they think, okay, listen, maybe this ain't working out. We're going to give God a little help. So Sarah, his wife, gives him the slave girl, and Abraham's like, oh, cool. And so Abraham takes the slave girl, and they have a baby, and it's like, okay. And God's like, nah, that's not what I said. And eventually, Sarah, his wife, does get pregnant. But now you got these two kids from different moms because he tried to do it his own way. And that's not working out real well. And so long story short, Ishmael and his mom get sent off, and God says, I'm going to bless them. I'm going to make him into a nation too, but my covenant is with you, like I said in the first place. And ever since that moment when she got sent away, Ishmael's family, the Arabs, and Isaac's family, the Jews, have not been able to stand each other because of cousins. And look at what's going on. The Jews today have a philosophy. You kill one Jew, we will kill 10 of you. I'm not saying it's a bad public policy if you're surrounded like they are, but I'm just saying that's what Jesus is saying. Listen, you say eye for an eye. That's not what I'm saying. That's the law of retaliation. You say an eye for an eye, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, you turn to them the left cheek also. What does that mean? He's not talking about retaliation. That's a famous verse, and that people have built an entire theology of pacifism around this verse. What we typically hear is that people want to play the what-if game with this. When Jesus said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, he was not talking about physical violence. What he was talking about was an insult. Back then, if you wanted to insult somebody, you would backhand them across the cheek. That was an insult. You've seen the old movies that you've read about in the 1800s, like they would pull out their gloves and they would slap somebody across the face. It's like their form of Facebook. If you wanted to insult somebody back then, you backhanded them. If you want to do it today, you get on Facebook and you talk ugly about it, right? Jesus says, do not play the what-if game. When we read the verse, do not resist an evil person. If somebody slaps you on the right cheek, turn the left cheek also. What we want to think in our head is, well, God, you mean to tell me, do you mean to tell me that if somebody, what if somebody breaks into my house and they're stealing my stuff and they're threatening my family? What if, God, what if that happens? Are you telling me that I can't defend myself? I have to turn the other cheek and just like bless them and pray for them. What if that happens, God? Is that what you're saying? No, it's not. It doesn't mean that you can't protect yourself. In fact, in Luke chapter 22, verse 36, Jesus tells his disciples, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. But he also said a few verses later, only use it when you need it. Peter had a sword, and when Jesus is being arrested, which he had just told them, this is God's will. This is what's about to happen. This is about to happen, guys. Get ready. This is going to happen. I'm going to get arrested. And when he does get arrested, Peter jumps in the middle of it and swings. How do you cut somebody's ear off without taking their head off? That's a question. Of all the important questions I want to ask whenever I get to heaven, that's the one I want to find out. And Peter cuts the guy's ear off. And Jesus is like, no. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about retaliation. But what happens when we're insulted? Which is what he's talking about. What is the reaction when we're insulted? We want to retaliate. That's not what Jesus is talking about here. He's not talking about playing the what-if game with this verse. In verse 39 it says, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. And if someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. The Greek word for evil person here is the word paneros. And it's not really talking about the person as much as the actions of the person. It means a person of bad character, but what it's really talking about is someone who is having bad thoughts or speech or acts, is projecting them on you. It's translated as evil person, but the actual definition is the actions of somebody who causes you hard labor or a hard time, somebody giving you a hard time, annoyances, and hardships. That's what it's talking about. Jesus is not saying you can't defend yourself if you're attacked. He is saying don't be so thin-skinned. If somebody slapped them in that day, it was an insult. Today it's on Facebook. Mike Tyson, I was watching him a couple days ago. And I'm going to try to do it without sounding like him. But Mike Tyson said, nobody would ever say to me to my face what they had been saying about me on Facebook. That's absolutely true. Listen, you can be brave on Facebook or in an email or on a website or stand up here talking about Mike Tyson on YouTube. Love you, Mike. But you're not going to do it to their face. Jesus is saying don't be thin-skinned. Listen, if somebody is causing you hurt or pain or is being annoying to you, if they hurt your feelings, we want to reach out. We want to retaliate. We want to lash out. Here's what Peter says. The same guy that cut off the guy's ear. Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 2, Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin and no deceit was found in his mouth. And when they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. And when he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. It's not between you and them. It has always been between you and God. When somebody insults you and hurts your feeling and talks about you badly and harms your reputation, how do you respond? Eye for an eye? Jesus keeps going. He says in verse 40, and if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. You know, under the law of Moses, the outer coat could not be taken from somebody. But Jesus is again taking it to another level. He says, just like with murder or adultery or everything else that he's been talking about, he says, if somebody wants your shirt, even though the law doesn't require it, give him the coat also. And here's the way we'll want to respond. Why? That's not fair. That is not just. I want justice. I want fairness. Jesus is not talking about lawsuits. What he's talking about is my attitude in my heart toward somebody else who is doing evil. Because how will I ever show them the grace of Christ unless I show them grace? So here's the thing. Do you really want fair? We're talking about perspective. Do you really want justice? Or do you just want them to get fairness and them to get justice? Do you want justice done to them, but you want grace to you? It's perspective. Jesus is taking it to a new level. Do I really want to get what I deserve, or do I want them to get what they deserve? Verse 41, he says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. At that time, all of Israel was under Roman occupation. And Roman law said if a soldier who is carrying his big pack comes across you on the road or whatever, under Roman law, you were required to take that burden, take that pack, and to go 1 mile. And they would literally mark it off. I mean, this is how detailed they were in Israel. They had marks on the highway what 1 mile was, and they would not step an inch past that. They would drop that sack and turn around and walk back. And Jesus, like, in your heart, if somebody is demanding that of you, I want you to go a little extra. And we're like, that's not fair. That's not justice. Perspective. Here's what I think Jesus is saying. I think what Jesus is saying in all of this, and what he wants me to understand, is that the grace of God is more important than my honor or my stuff or my time or my comfort. And if that is how God views me, and the way that I insult him, and the way that I take advantage of him, and the way that I try to manipulate him, how should I respond to somebody else? Because that thing that they said about me on Facebook that hurt my feelings is this big. But the thing that I did to God that caused the death of his son is unimaginable. Perspective. Arnold Palmer got invited years ago over to Saudi Arabia to play in a golf tournament. The king of Saudi Arabia had built this beautiful golf course over there. And he invited like the best players and the legends of the game to come over. And there's like 100 of them, I think it was. And so 100 of them go over to Saudi Arabia to play on this beautiful golf course. And they had dinner with the king, and he had even got a chance. The king asked Arnold Palmer, I can't even say his name, Arnold Palmer, the king asked him, hey, would you give me a golf lesson? And so he gave the king a golf lesson. And all expenses paid. All expenses paid. First class everything. And so when it was all over with, they had their final dinner, and the king's going around the room. And when he got to Mr. Palmer, he says, listen, is there anything I can do for you? And Arnold's like, what are you talking about? You flew me over here. We've been treated like royalty ourselves the whole time we're here. What do you mean, what can you do for me? He's like, listen, I've always admired you and loved you. I appreciate you. You gave me a golf lesson. What can I do for you? Is there anything you collect, or what can I do for you? And so Arnold Palmer thought about it for a second. He's like, he didn't know what to say. He's like, well, I collect golf clubs. He says, okay, I'll give you a golf club. And so Arnold flies back home, and weeks go by, and he hasn't heard anything. And the way he tells the story is, I kept checking the mail to see if I was getting this. I'm thinking, maybe it's going to be a gold-plated golf club. That'd be crazy, right? Nothing for weeks and weeks. And finally, one day, there's a little envelope. There's a little envelope that came, and he had to sign for it. And he opened up the envelope. It was the deed to a 500-acre golf resort, a golf club. You see perspective? A golf club to the king of Saudi Arabia is a resort. A golf club to me is a sporting goods store on sale or used. And I can't do a lot with it anyway. It don't matter. But do you understand perspective? Your perspective versus the king of Saudi Arabia's perspective is not the same thing. Your perspective on how you are treating other people is so small. It is about like, well, I'm just straightening them out. Or even worse, my perspective on how they treat me and things, well, I don't like their attitude. And I'm tit for tat, I'm fixing to give them some of their own medicine. And we're dealing with these dumb little things. And look at the perspective from God's point of view. How much he sacrificed. How much he gave up. How much he loved you. You can't even get over this one little thing that somebody did to hurt your feelings. And yet we prayed a few minutes ago, Father, forgive me of my trespasses in the same way that I'm forgiving for somebody for what they said on Facebook. You mean it? Do you really mean it? Because that's an oath. Right? That's like an oath. That's like saying, God, don't forgive me. Here's an oath. Don't forgive me unless I'm forgiving to them. Do you really mean that? Perspective. From God's perspective. Do you understand how aggravating it must be for him when he looks at us being nasty to somebody else in what we say, or wanting tit for tat, eye for eye, vengeance, retaliation for something they did to us, with all that he has put up with from us. I was not saved because Jesus demanded fairness from me for what I had done. I was saved because God gave me grace despite everything I had done. You cannot, listen, I say this all the time, but I don't think we mean it. You have one job. You have one job. Make disciples of Jesus Christ. If you take that seriously, you cannot make a disciple out of somebody else that you're just about, or that you're unwilling to forgive because they did something ugly to you. Do you love your neighbor or not? Perspective. No one will ever be led to Christ because you demanded fairness or justice. That's what Jesus is saying. They are only led to Christ when you show them grace in spite of what they do, just like God did for you. Heavenly Father, thank you so much, God, for for your words. Thank you for the perspective that you've shown me this week, God. Father, I pray that your word got out today. I pray that each individual here, Father, heard from you what they needed to hear from you, not from me. Father, forgive me. Forgive me for not being more forgiving and more kind. Forgive me for demanding justice and fairness from other people, but wanting mercy and grace from you. Father, thank you for everything that you have done for me and for all of us. And help us to have that same grace with everybody we come into contact with. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. We're going to sing our closing song. I'm going to invite everyone to stand. The altar is open. If you want to come spend some time in prayer, I'll be right down front if you want to come and let me pray with you. I invite you to do that. Let's all stand.